Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Ball Profits. My name is Rob Scooter. Thanks for joining me tonight. Tonight we're going to do the start and sit video for week 8, and we just want to give you some guys that you may want to consider sitting or starting and look at their value. Now, this week there's 6 teams that are on a bye, and so that's going to mean that you're going to probably have to stretch yourself a little bit in terms of finding replacements out there. Be a little less picky in terms of who you're going to put in there to plug in your guys that are on a bye. Also, when we talk about this video, we want you to take this information and put it in the context of your league. And what we mean by that is we're putting this out there, but I can't take into account all the information that you guys have in terms of your scoring system, bench depth, who's available on the waiver wire. And for a lot of you, when we say that you need to sit a guy, you may not be able to do that. Your 4th wide receiver may not be good enough to plug in, or there may not be in the waiver wire. So maybe what we're telling you is don't sit the guy per se, but just lower your expectations. Normally he might be number 1 wide out, but maybe it's a tough matchup at corner. So he becomes number 3. Last week, a lot of people struggle with Amari Cooper. He'd been struggling. And what we said in the video, first of all, we said we thought he was going to rebound last week, and he did. We also told you that if you're in a 12-team league that you start 3 wide receivers, that's 36 wideouts. In reality, do you have a wideout out there beyond 36 that you can plug in for Amari Cooper, knowing his potential and talent? Probably not. And if you sat him last week, you made a grave mistake. Obviously, he went on and had a huge week. So take this information, put it in the context of your league, and always remember that oftentimes volume and targets will trump anything else. Once again, you can have a great matchup, but if your guy's only going to get 4 or 5 carries or 3 or 4 targets, probably not nearly as valuable as a guy who maybe is not playing as well as a tough matchup, but he's going to touch the ball 20, 25 times. So once again, put it in the context of your league. So let's start in week 1, or game 1, I should say. Baltimore versus Miami. Let's take a look. Well, let's look at the quarterback situation. When you look at Joe Flacco, he's a guy that you need to sit. He's struggled all year long. In fact, right now his quarterback rating is around 70. He's got 5 touchdown passes to 8 picks. Last week during the Vikings, he kind of salvaged his day with the last second. Literally, as time is running out, he throws a TD pass. So he's struggling right now. You got Wallace in concussion protocol. He might be cleared, although it's a short week for him, so probably not. Macklin has a shoulder injury. And Miami's really solid against the pass. They allow 13 fewest points to quarterbacks. So I would sit Joe Flacco. Another guy this week that's not going to play is Jay Cutler. He's got a broken rib. He's expected to sit. And that leaves Matt Moore. Now, Matt Moore's actually not a bad guy out there. He's got good weapons around him. He might get Parker back this week. And last year, in relief time, he had a quarterback rating of 105 in 4 games. And he looked good in relief last week. And here's the one concern that we have. Baltimore gives up the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks. And so Matt Moore is certainly a guy that you can plug in there if you need to. But lower your expectations. Baltimore's pass defense is pretty good. As far as running backs go, you got Jay. He's a start. You need to play him. He's getting over 20 carries a game. Volume matters. Last week, I think he got around 24, 25 carries. Now his yards per carry weren't very good, but once again, he's touching the ball, and he should rebound. Right now, Baltimore gives up the 10th most points to running back, so I would start Jay. Then you leave Alec Collins. Now, right now, Alec Collins, I believe, is the best running back of all those on Baltimore's team. He's got a 5.9 yards per carry, but he hasn't scored a touchdown yet, and here's why. Flacco just can't get that offense near the goal line. They're struggling to move the ball. And they don't use Collins in the passing game. And so even though he's got the best yards per carry, he's the best pure runner on that team, his fantasy values are really starting to take a hit. And so I would probably look elsewhere. And here's the other thing you need to consider too, is if the Ravens fall behind, which they have often this year, they'll have to throw the ball. They won't be able to stick to the run. And another thing to consider why maybe Collins is not a guy you want to look at is Miami plays the run well. They're tough. And so when you look at Collins, he's a serviceable start at about a running back 3. But he's not a great start. So if you have to, you can start him. Hopefully you've got better options out there. Another guy out there is Javarius Allen. Now he's a better option than Collins because he's highly involved in the passing game. Over the last 6 games, he's had over 5 catches per game. And so he's a guy that you definitely want to start PPR values. In standard leagues, I probably would sit him. Now let's take a look at the wideouts in this game. Well, Baltimore gives up the 2nd fewest points to wideouts. So you need to be aware of that when you think in terms of starting Miami wideouts. With that said, I still think you need to start Landry. Now he's had touchdown. He's got receiving touchdowns 3 weeks in a row, and he's a huge target guy. In fact, he averages over 11 targets per game. And so even though Baltimore's tough against the pass, I think you got to go with Landry. Now Parker, if he starts this week, if he does come back from his ankle injury, he's got such a high ceiling. He's such a talented guy. In fact, of all the wideouts, he's much more talented than Landry. You'd have to start him, but once again, he's questionable. I'd watch the injury report. Right now, I think they're leaning towards him not playing, so something there to consider. Now, Kenny Stills is out there. Kenny Stills had a good game last week. I would only consider Kenny Stills if Parker sits and if you don't have any other good options, because once again, Baltimore's good against the pass, so he's somebody that you may consider in a pinch. As far as tight ends go, you got Benjamin Watson. Miami's vulnerable to tight ends, so he's somebody that you could look towards. I'd watch the injury report there. And Julius Thomas, just somebody who hasn't looked that great this year, so I would look elsewhere as far as tight ends go. As far as kickers go, you got to start Tucker. Tucker's a great kicker. He's clutch. He's a guy that week in and week out you got to play him. And there's Cody Parker, who is not a bad pick. He's safe, but he doesn't have a very high ceiling as a kicker goes. As far as defenses go, both defenses are actually good plays this week. Baltimore and Miami are not bad plays at all. Those are guys that you could put in there and feel pretty confident with in this game. Let's look at the next game this week. Minnesota and Cleveland. Now, Cleveland's a home team, but the game's being played in London. Let's look at Case Keenum as a quarterback. Well, actually, it's a good start for Case. Cleveland gives up the 11th most points to quarterbacks, but in all reality, they're actually a lot worse against the pass than that. But what's happened a lot this year is teams are blowing Cleveland out, and in the second half, they're able to kind of take their foot off the pedal, and they need to throw the ball a lot. They can run the ball and can control the clock because Cleveland's down by so many. So Case Keenum is actually a real good matchup this week. He's a guy that I'm not a big fan of otherwise, but this week you could plug and play him. As far as the Cleveland quarterbacks, whether it's Kaiser, Kessler, Hogan, sit them all. None of them are good. They're all bad. They have no legitimate wideout, and so those aren't guys who wouldn't consider. And then to make matters worse, Minnesota's very good against the pass. So none of the Cleveland quarterbacks are guys you even want to consider. Don't do that. As far as running backs go, Latavius Murray broke out last week, had a huge week. That shocked some people. He had 18 carries for 113 yards, 6.3 yards per carry. Now, if you look at the progression of his carries the last 5 games, he had 2 carries to 7 to 12 to 15. Last week he had 18 carries. And what might be happening there is he missed a lot of preseason with injuries. He might just starting to get into shape now, rounding out into shape. And I think that if Latavius Murray can continue to produce, he's probably a better fit for the Minnesota offense than Jerick McKinnon. And here's what I mean by that. Jerick's had some good games. I know fantasy owners really rode him the last 2 weeks. But he's a running back that I think that the Vikings would prefer to have to be their third down back or that they use in passing situations. And then Latavius Murray be your guy that could get maybe 15, 20 carries between the tackles. He's a little bit more physical of a runner. And so if he can continue to produce Latavius Murray, he's a better option as your kind of go-to guy with Jerick in the passing situation and third down. Now, both of those backs are really game flow dependent, hot hand. They're going to go with whatever's got the hot hand. So it's really hard to trust either one. But once again, after last week, I think you're going to see more and more Latavius Murray with Jerick McKinnon coming off the bench. Now, because he's such a good wide receiver, Jerick McKinnon does have PPR value, so I would start him in PPR leagues, even if Latavius Murray gets a lot of carries. But I would temper your expectations in Jerick McKinnon in standard leagues. As far as Cleveland running backs go, I'd start Duke Johnson in all PPR leagues. You could start in a standard league, but you have to lower expectations, a lot weaker there. Now, currently, Duke Johnson has a 5.2 yards per carry, and he's on pace to over 70 catches. Now, add to that, Cleveland often is playing from behind, so that keeps Duke involved in the game in the passing situations. I would sit Isaiah Crowell unless you're really desperate. Minnesota gives up the second fewest points to running backs, and right now, Isaiah Crowell has a career low of 3.2 yards per carry. He's really, really struggling. And then matters got worse this week as they lost Joe Thomas, future All-Pro Hall of Famer. He's going to be out for the year with a torn tricep muscle. So you could start Isaiah Crowell if you're really desperate, but I would sit him this week. You could start Duke Johnson in a PPR league if you need. As far as wideouts go, I would start Adam Thielen. He's a safe pick, but not a great pick this week. Another one, if he plays, Stephon Diggs. He's such a good wide receiver. He's very talented. He plays as a top 10 wideout when he's healthy, but the guy is rarely healthy, and it sounds like he's going to miss this game this week. But if he does play, he's the guy that you could start. I would sit all wide receivers for Cleveland right now. In fact, they're even talking about Kenny Britt maybe being cut. Ricardo Lewis is really kind of the best wild the last few weeks, but he's going to line up against Xavier Rhodes, who's a shutdown corner, so don't even think about starting him. As far as tight ends go, Kyle Rudolph has a great matchup this week. The Browns are second most. They give the second most points to tight ends. Another guy who would be a decent start for a tight end would be David Njoku. Now he's got 3 TDs on the year. He's kind of their safety valve. There's a guy that they'll check the ball down to. He's a talented rookie who's an adequate play, but not a great play this week if you need a tight end. As far as kickers go, I would sit Zane Gonzalez, but I would start Kaya Forbath. As far as defenses go, start Minnesota's defense. They're a great matchup this week, and sit Cleveland's defense. Let's look at the next game. The Bills versus the Raiders. Okay, so let's look at the guys there to consider. Well, Derek Carr, he bounced back. He had a huge week last week. I know he had been injured. He came back, didn't have a great game, but he really bounced back. Now, he faces a very strong Bills pass defense, but in my estimation, he's still a must-start. One, he's a very talented quarterback, and there's slim pickings for quarterbacks out there with 6 buys, injuries, so many question marks at quarterback. It's really hard to pass up David Carr, even if he's playing a tough pass defense, so I would start him. That leaves you Tyrod Taylor. Now, Tyrod Taylor had a good week last week. He plays Oakland, who gives up the 15th most points to quarterbacks. Now, once again, Tyrod Taylor had a good game last week, but that was against Tampa Bay, who has a terrible pass defense. So you have to put that in its context. Now, if you're in a bind, Tyrod Taylor, somebody you could go to. He's more of a game manager at this point. He's got 7 TD passes to 2 picks on the year, so he's more of a game manager who runs the wall. But he has a very low ceiling, and he doesn't really have any legitimate wideouts to throw to at this point. His best wideout is Jordan Matthews, who last game had 2 catches for 10 yards. So I'm leaning towards sitting Tyrod Taylor if I was you. As far as running backs go, well, you got Lynch is suspended this week. Not is Marshawn Lynch suspended, but he's been really ineffective. He's got a 3.7 yards per carry for the year. That leaves Washington and Richard. Now, Buffalo's very good against the run. And now here's another thing that's kind of playing against that. Both Richard and Washington are very similar backs. Running styles, how they're used, etc. They're almost identical in their height, their weight, etc. And so I think you're going to see them split up the carries. Now, if I had to pick a back of the two, I'd go with Richard. He's been considerably better this year and more effective than Washington. Of course, you need to start LeSean McCoy. That's a no-brainer. You're going to start him week in and week out. As far as wideouts go, Bills' defense is good, but they actually give up a lot of points to wideouts, the 8th most in the league. And so you got to start Amari Cooper. He looks like he's back and going to be just fine. And you got to start Michael Crabtree. He's got 6 TDs on the year. In fact, he's had a TD reception 3 games in a row. Now, last week we predicted Amari Cooper's going to rebound, and he did just that. So I think once again he's going to be fine from this point forward. Another guy. Other guys to consider, you look at other Bills wideouts, their best wideout, Jordan Matthews, at 2 catches for 10 yards. There's no wideouts there for Buffalo that I would be comfortable starting. Neither should you. Don't start any of those guys. As far as tight ends go, you got Jared Cook, who he's been really quiet all year, and then last week he busted out with 106 yards on 6 catches. Now, Buffalo gives with the 5th most points to tight ends. So you look at last week's performance, you look at Buffalo's vulnerability to tight ends. Jared Cook is somebody that you could probably start this weekend and feel somewhat comfortable with. But I would keep your expectations low. I would say he ranks at about a 15 to 18 in terms of tight end rankings for this week. Clay's injured. He may not play, so I'd steer away from him. You could start Nick O'Leary if need be, but I would only start Nick O'Leary if Clay sits. Now, he topped out 50 yards the past 2 weeks, so he's an okay start if you're desperate. As far as kickers go, I would start Stephen Hauschka and Giorgio Tavecchio. Those are guys that you could start a kicker. As far as defenses go, sit Oakland, start Buffalo. Those are some things to consider there. Indianapolis and Cincinnati. Well, Andy Dalton has a great start this week. Now he started the year really slow. The first 2 games he looked horrible, but they fired their offensive coordinator. They brought a new guy in. Since they brought the new offensive coordinator in, he's played a lot more effective. The offense has looked entirely different. And since week 2, Andy Dalton has 9 TD passes to only 4 picks over the last 4 games. So he's looking a lot better. The offense is looking a lot better. And now they go and have a wonderful matchup against Indianapolis. It gives up third most points to quarterbacks. In fact, last Sunday, Indianapolis gave up 330 passing yards to Blake Bortles. Let me say that again. They give up 330 yards to Blake Bortles, and Bortles is not a good quarterback. And so this is a great matchup for Andy Dalton. I even thought about picking him up and plug and playing him, even though I have some good quarterbacks out there, just because I think he's got such a great matchup this week. I would sit Jacoby Brissett. He's got 3 deep passes in 7 games this year. He faces a Bengals defense that gives up the 7th fewest points to quarterbacks. As far as running backs in this game go, Mixon is a guy who's really starting to play better. He's coming on. They're getting more involved in the game, and so he's a guy that I would definitely go ahead and roll with. In fact, he's a guy that you may want to trade with out there before his value goes up. He's a guy that you could definitely pick up right now. And Indianapolis gives up the 2nd most points to running backs, so Mixon is a great start this week. Now we look at the Indianapolis running back situation. You have Frank Gore. That's a tougher matchup. Cincinnati's pretty good against the run. And you see Frank Gore, when he's 34 years old, he's getting older, and they're decreasing his role in the game, while at the same time increasing the younger and more effective Mack's role. And so once again, that's limiting Frank Gore's value. Now, as far as Mack considered, he might be worth a fly if you're desperate, but he loses a lot of targets still to Gore, so those two are kind of splitting carries, splitting targets, and makes it very difficult to really nail down one of those guys. Now you add to that, Jacoby's not a great quarterback. They don't get a lot of plays of scrimmage on offense, and so both those guys aren't great plays. I'd probably stay away from both Mack and Gore this week. As far as wideouts go, well, you have T.Y. Hilton, who is really struggling. I hope he picks it up. I have him in one of my leagues. I desperately need him to pick it up, and he's probably not going to be that consistent until Andrew Luck comes back, and that may not even happen this year. Now they shut Andrew Luck down because of a sore shoulder, and they gave him a cortisone shot. It sounds to me like he could possibly be done for the year. I guess we'll find out. So T.Y. Hilton, what do you do with him? He's really struggled. Well, I would say this. T.Y. Hilton is far too good to sit. Now, with his recent struggles, what I would relegate him to is kind of a wide receiver 2 or 3 status. You could bump him down probably to a wide receiver 3, but it's hard to sit a guy like him. One, he's still the number 1 guy. They still need to throw the ball, and when they do, they're going to try to get in his hands. So I would still start Hilton. Cincinnati's very good against the pass, so once again, all other Indy wideouts, I would sit them. AJ Green, as you know, is a must start. Another guy you could consider is Brendan LaFell. He had a TD last week. And Indianapolis allows 7th most points to wideouts. So Brandon LaFell falls into what I would call a wide receiver 4 category. He's right on that bubble in terms of a guy that maybe you need to start or could start if you had to. As far as tight ends go, you got Croft and Doyle. They're low-end starters at tight end. They don't have a great matchup, but they're serviceable going into this game. As far as kickers go, I would start Randy Bullock and Adam Vinatieri, both guys that you could start. On defense, I would start the Bengals. I would sit Indianapolis in this game here. Let's look at New England versus the Chargers. Patriots versus the Chargers. Well, obviously it's a no-brainer. You don't need me to tell you to start Tom Brady. He's a guy that you need to start. Philip Rivers is a guy that you need to start also. He faces New England, who gives up the most points to quarterbacks. So this is going to be most likely a shootout. I wouldn't be surprised to see the final score be 35-31, New England, something like that. So start both of those quarterbacks. As far as running backs go, I'd start Melvin Gordon. He has a great matchup. Now, New England, this is confusing if you look at the running back situation. They have so many mouths to feed there, and it's very unpredictable. If you look at Dion Lewis right now, he's probably the most trustworthy back. In fact, if you look at Dion Lewis, his last 5 games, his carries have increased from 2, 4, 7, 11 last week, 13. He's had over 50 yards the last 3 games. And last Sunday finished with 76 yards rushing. And he's very good in the passing game. He's got great hands, so that leaves him probably the best option at running back there. But once again, the concern with that is he loses carries to Mike Gillislee, and he loses targets to White and Burkhead. And so Rex and all those guys will steal carries. So it leaves that whole running back situation kind of on some shaky ground there. But if I had to roll with the guy, it'd probably be Dion Lewis. Mike Gillislee, who his carries have decreased, his productivity's decreased, and he's really touchdown dependent at this point. So I just don't trust Mike Gillislee. If you're looking for a guy in a PPR league, James White is a good PPR only start. That's the only one I consider there. As far as wideouts go in this game, you got to start Hogan and Cook. Got to go with those guys. I would sit Benjamin, Ty Williams, and Mike Williams. Now, here's why I would do that. On that team, the only team that I would start is Allen. Keenan Allen's wide receiver you can start, but the other guys, they split carries. They're very similar. Last 2 weeks, Travis Benjamin, yeah, he had a big touchdown pass, but he's only had 2 targets, 2 catches in the last 2 weeks. So between Williams, Ty Williams, Mike Williams, and Travis Benjamin, they just spread the ball around too much. It's really hard to nail down there. Even though they've got a great matchup, it's really hard to tell of those 3 guys who's going to get the targets. In fact, it's a pretty good likelihood that they all see 3 to 5 targets, and neither one of them is all that productive. But across the board, maybe they're good for Philip Rivers. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Gronk. Obviously, every week, future Hall of Famer, no-brainer. Start Gronkowski. Start Henry. Henry's really coming on. You need to sit Gates. Gates is a great tight end, but at this point, he's not worth starting. In fact, Gates is not even worth owning. He shouldn't even be on your bench. Dump the guy if you have him. As far as kickers go, you can start Gostkowski and Novak. As far as defenses, I would sit both defenses in this game. Neither one of them offer you a whole lot. Saints versus the Bears. Well, Drew Brees, another one. Just like Tom Brady, you got to start him. He's a great quarterback, future Hall of Famer. And you need to sit Mitch Trubisky. This is a rookie. He's got a lot of growing pains, making a lot of mistakes. Last game, he completed 4 passes. Now, they didn't need to do a lot. The score was 17-3. They played conservative. They won the game, but he just hasn't looked that sharp. Now you add to the fact he doesn't really have legitimate wideout there. Mitch Trubisky, sit the guy. As far as running backs go, I would start both Kamara and Mark Ingram. They both are looking really good. Now, it's none of those situations where they split the carries, but they've found a way in that offense to keep them both productive. So I would be comfortable starting both of those guys. And Kamara is a high PPR value, a little bit lower in standard leagues. But since Adrian has left, since they traded him to Arizona, Alvin Kamara has looked really good. So once again, Ingram, Kamara, you could start. Now, obviously, you got to start Jordan Howard at running back there. It's easier for teams. They stack the box. Oftentimes, his yards per carry will be lower. But Chicago's not afraid to give him the ball 20, 30, sometimes even 35 times. They're going to feed him the rock to protect the rookie quarterback. And so Jordan Howard is a guy that you can start there. As far as wideouts go, you got to start Michael Thompson. And you can start Ted Ginn Jr. Now, it looked for a while there that Willie Snead would come back and he'd become the number 2 guy. But something's going on there. I don't know if it's an injury or if he's fallen out of favor with the coaching staff, but right now Ted Ginn Jr. has had 2 good weeks in a row. He's had 11 catches and 204 yards in the TD. on 11 targets, so he's been very productive. So in the meantime, I would roll a 10 kid junior, and I would sit Snead, and I wouldn't touch him until 1, he shows he's healthy, and 2, he's getting targets, and he's highly involved in the passing game again. So that's how I would roll. Sit all Chicago Bears wideouts. Don't even bother wasting your time with any of those guys there. I would sit Zach Miller. New England's linebackers give up the 5th fewest points to tight end, so I would sit him, and I would sit Fleener. As far as kickers go, I would start Lutz. Barth is an okay start at kicker for Chicago, but personally, when you put all numbers aside, it looks good. It looks like a decent start. Until Mitch improves at a quarterback, I'd sit him also at kicker. There's a very good chance this team could get shut down, or maybe only kick an extra point in the game. As far as defense goes, I would sit Chicago. I'd actually start in New Orleans. New Orleans defense is improving weekly. They're starting to put pressure on the quarterback. They're becoming more opportunistic. And there's a really good chance that Drew Brees is able to put points on the board, which means Chicago falls from behind. Now you have a rookie quarterback that's got to throw the ball a lot more, which means more sacks, interceptions, turnover opportunities. So I would roll with New Orleans this week. I think they're a pretty good play on defense there. Let's look at Atlanta and the New York Jets. Well, you could start McCown. Now, he's had over 25 points the last 2 games, and he faces a Falcons defense that's kind of middle of the road in terms of points allowed. He hasn't been great, he hasn't been spectacular, but he's been good enough. And so if you're desperate for quarterback play, McCown is something that you could roll with. You're going to start Matt Ryan. Now, I want to say this about Matt Ryan. A lot of people are waiting for him to return to form last year and see what he does. But I want to caution you that Matt Ryan's probably not going to return to form. In fact, if you went on our site, the Fantasy Football Profits website, we did our preseason rankings. Here's what we said about Matt Ryan going into this year. And I'm just going to read this for you. This is what we put on there. So here's my prediction about Matt Ryan. Last year was a bit of an aberration. It was the first time Matt had a quarterback rating over 100, and only the second time he had over 30 touchdown passes, which is somewhat concerning when you consider that the weapons around him that he used to have consist of Roddy White, Tony Gonzalez, and Julio Jones. So besides last year, he's been routinely underachieved. You also consider the fact that he lost offensive coordinator and quarterback guru Kyle Shanahan, who left for the 49ers. Don't get pressure into taking him too early. Last year was a bumper year. Now, right now, if you look at Matt Ryan's quarterback rating is 89.3, and that's actually not very far off his career average. Now, I think he's going to improve his touchdowns. Right now, he has 7 TD passes to 6 interceptions. And he's on pace for 19 TD passes and 16 interceptions. So obviously he's going to improve that. He's still going to probably hit around 20, 22, 23 in that range there. So he's going to improve in that regard, but he's not going to get back to last year's MVP form. So you could probably start Matt Ryan, but once again, temper your expectations. Don't expect a blow-up game. As far as running backs go, Powell, Forte, and McGuire. Now, this is another one that's really confusing. If any one of those guys would get hurt, if Powell would go down, or if you could see Forte or whatever, that would increase the value of these running backs. They're all playing pretty well right now. The problem is they split carries. And so it's just very difficult to pin that down. So you're going to get a running back. If you look at Powell and Forte, Forte is going to get you around 8 or 9 carries, 5 or 6 targets in the passing game. The same thing with Powell, and then McGuire will steal a couple touches here and there. Right now, if you're looking at those 3 backs, Forte played well last week. He's probably playing better, but he is a little bit older. He's a guy you could roll with. You got to start Freeman, obviously, at running back. Another guy you could look at is Coleman. Now, Coleman is averaging 7 carries per game. His value is in PPR leagues at this point. So he's got a fair start, but he's not a great start. He has a limited ceiling. What would really kind of jump up his values if Freeman were to go down with an injury? And so he's a guy that I would certainly stash on my bench as a backup, but I'm not sure I'd want to roll out as a starting running back at this point. As far as wideouts in this game go, you got to go with Julio Jones. Obviously, number 11 right now, you got to start him. That's a no-brainer. Now you look at the wideouts for the Jets. You got Kearse, Anderson, and Curley. That's another situation where they spread the ball around so much. Now, Kearse leads the team with 4 TD passes. If you're going to roll with one wideout, he's the guy to probably go with. But last game, he had 1 TD. It was on 1 catch. So it's just really hard to pin that down. If you look at Anderson in that group, you take away 1 game versus New England, he's only had 5 targets per game. So what happens is, again, they spread the ball around too much, and it really doesn't make any one of those wide receivers valuable. You could roll the dice and hope you get lucky. I'd rather look elsewhere. Sanu had a good week last week. He came back from injury, but once again, playing New England, who was brutal against the pass. He's kind of a bad start. I would sit him this week. As far as tight ends go, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, we talk about him a lot. Austin Seferian-Jenkins is a guy that they have said for years has a lot of talented, but couldn't stay out of trouble and couldn't stay healthy. Well, he's healthy now. He's staying out of trouble, and he's looking really good. And he's had TDs, I believe, 3 games in a row. Another one you could start is Hooper. He's had a great matchup now. Hooper's a little bit confusing this year. He's had 3 games, if you total up, where he averaged 75 yards a game, and then his other 3 games, he's averaging 7 yards per game, and so he's really hit or miss. With that, I'm the type of guy, I play conservative. I'd rather sit him and roll somebody I feel more confident with. As far as kickers go, you could go with Chandler Catanzaro and Bryant are both good kickers to start. I would start Atlanta's defense, but I would sit the Jets. That's what I would do this week if I was you. How about the Eagles and the 49ers? Well, you got to start Wetz. This guy is turning into a perennial All-Pro. This guy is the real deal stud. Over the last 3 games, he had 11 touchdown passes. This is a guy that you can trust. You got to go with Wentz. And San Francisco gives up the second most points to quarterback. So this is a beautiful matchup for everybody out there that owns Wentz. Beathard had a solid start last week. His first game as a rookie. He had 19.4 points. Now, he faces Philadelphia. It gives up the 10th most points to quarterbacks. But I would still set him, and here's why. Now he's had a chance to play. There's some game film. Defensive coordinators can plan a little bit better for the rookie. And that's it. He's still a rookie who doesn't have great weapons around him. I just don't feel comfortable putting my trust in a rookie quarterback in his second start, so I would roll elsewhere. As far as running backs go, I would start Blount. He faces a weak run defense. Now, if you minus game 2, if you take game 2 out of there, if you look at all of his other games, Blount has averaged 14 carries per game. And so I think this is a game where he really breaks out and gets back on track. I see 100 yards, 1 or 2 TDs. It could be huge. Now, there's not enough value at this point to start Smallwood or Clement. They just don't get enough volume to really warrant a start. I would start Carlos Hyde. Now, Philly is stingy against the run, but how many teams out there, how many fantasy teams have a better number 3 running back on their bench you could plug into Carlos Hyde situation? Probably not. I would sit Matt Breida. As far as wideouts go, Pierre Garçon is a guy that's get a lot of targets. He's going against the Philly defense that gives him the 5th most points to wideouts, so Pierre Garçon is a good start. Now here's Jeffrey, Alshon Jeffrey. He's really fallen into what I would call wide receiver 3 status, and even that's a bit of a stretch. Statistically, he hasn't been that good, but he's far too talented, and Wentz is far too good of a quarterback to begin to sit him yet. So for me, Jeffrey falls into that wide receiver 3, meaning if you have to start 3 wideouts in your league, then I would start him. If you have to start 2, I might sit him for somebody else. You can start Aguilar at this point. He's really come on. Nelson Aguilar has 5 TDs, and he's developed into a very good, reliable wideout there. And Marquise Goodwin has a good matchup, but he's kind of hit or miss. And so he's a guy that I would consider wide receiver 4 or 5. He's right on that bubble. If you're desperate, you could start him. Once again, very inconsistent. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Zach Ertz. He's the top tight end right now in terms of yardage and catches. He's number 1 in all tight outs. The guy is very good. And I would sit Kittle. Now, Kittle's a guy that we've talked about the last few weeks. He's a young tight end. He looks very talented. He's got a bright future. But he took a step back last week with Beathard at quarterback. And so in the meantime, until Beathard figures it out, until we see how they gel together, what kind of chemistry they have, I would sit him. As far as kickers go, you got to start Jake Elliott. This guy has been a wonderful find for so many owners. This guy is killing it there in that offense. And sit Gould. As far as defenses go, I would start Philly, sit San Francisco in this matchup. How about the Buccaneers and the Panthers? Well, as far as quarterbacks go, I would start Jameis Winston. Now, he's got a tough matchup. Carolina limits a lot of quarterbacks in terms of how many points they allow, but Jameis Winston's been good this year. In fact, of the 6 games he's played, 4 of the 6 he's had over 300 yards passing, and one of those games he left injured. Otherwise, he probably would have had 5 of the 6. And so he's a guy that's throwing the ball down the field. Part of the reason why is the Tampa Bay defense is brutal, so they're constantly playing from behind. They have to throw the ball. So Jameis Winston is a good play this week, just in terms of volume and opportunity. Cam Newton plays Tampa Bay. That gives up the 3rd most points to quarterbacks, so Cam Newton should have a good game. As far as running backs go, Doug Martin, I would start him. And I would start McCaffrey in PPR leagues. He's really kind of boiled down to where he's really only got value in terms of a wide receiver. And so I would start McCaffrey. Now, this week, I'm going to just go out there on a limb, and I'd say I would start Jonathan Stewart. Now, I know he struggled all year, but what we're noticing, they're giving less and less carries to McCaffrey. Stewart's still getting double-digit carries. Somebody has to run the ball. And Stewart has been a notoriously slow starter, and he's usually picked it up as the season went on. So I predict right there that Jonathan Stewart's going to have a good game. I would go ahead and start him, and I think he'll do well for you this week. As far as wideouts go, Mike Evans, no-brainer. He's not one of those guys you got to start week in and week out. Doesn't matter what matchup, you can't sit Mike Evans. You can start Benjamin Funchess. Those are both good starts this week. Once again, to Tampa Bay, that gives up the most points to wideouts of any defense out there, so start those 2. Now, Jackson is one of those guys that goes against Carolina. That's kind of tough against the pass. They play pretty well against wideouts. He's had some decent games. He's getting some targets. They do throw the ball a lot, so he falls into what I would say is a wide receiver 3-4 category there. So you'll have to figure out, based on where he's at, what you have available if you want to start him. As far as tight ends go, you got Brate and Howard. Now, this is tough because Cameron Brate has really developed into a quality tight end. But now last week, O.J. Howard, who was a young rookie who had a lot of talent, they talked a lot about him in the preseason, had a huge blow-up game. And so what's going to happen there is I'm assuming you're going to see more looks, more targets Howard's away, and that's going to devalue Brate. But once again, Brate has 4 TDs this year, and he's averaging 16.5 points the last 5 games in terms of fantasy. So you're not going to sit Brate, but I would caution you there to lower your expectations now that Howard's starting to develop as a tight end. Ed Dickson, I would sit him. He's had 1 good game this year. Otherwise, he's no Greg Olsen. Start Gano, and Patrick Murray is a sufficient start. Kicking for Tampa Bay there, but he's not a great start. As far as defenses go, I would really sit both defenses right now. And we have Seattle versus Houston. Well, got to start Russell Wilson. They have no running game, so he's got to throw the ball a lot. In the last 4 games, he's got 10 touchdown passes, only 3 picks. So you got to go with Russell Wilson. Now you'd start Watson in this game, right? Deshaun Watson, this guy has been phenomenal. It's hard not to play him. In the last 3 games, he's had 12 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. But Seattle's defense is playing really, really well right now, and this is going to be a real true test for this rookie. And so here's one of them where statistically it almost looks like you have to play Watson, but I would be very cautious at this point to see how he's really going to do against the Seattle defense. It's going to bring it. They're going to put pressure on him. We'll see how he reacts. If you have no one better out there, go with Watson. As far as running backs go, sit all Seattle backs. None of them are offering any value at this point. You need to start Lamar Miller, and that's simply based on the fact that he's a starting running back. He's going to get volume, but don't expect a big day from him going against Seattle. As far as wideouts go, you got to start Hopkins. Now, Hopkins has been on fire since Watkins has started throwing the ball, or Watson, I should say, has started throwing the ball. Now, the one concern I have is you're going to see Hopkins lined up against Sherman, and that's going to slow him down. But he's going to get a lot of targets value. The rookie quarterback has been afraid to force feed him the ball, and so you need to start him. But I would say Hopkins falls into a wide receiver 2 category this week. Fuller. Now, Fuller's a guy, Will Fuller, since he's come back. He's been back 3 games, has 5 TDs. He's young, talented, former first-round pick. But he's done a lot of this on limited targets. So right now, his value, he's become touchdown dependent. And so for me, Will Fuller going against Seattle falls into wide receiver 3 or 4 category. Another one of those where I'm not real comfortable with him starting him this week, but he's done really well so far, so what do you expect? He's a guy that I would maybe start with low expectations. He has a low ceiling just for this week. You would start Baldwin and sit all other wideouts there for Seattle. As far as tight ends go, start Jimmy Graham. He's got a good matchup, and sit all tight ends for Houston. You could sit, start Walsh. I would sit the kicker for Houston. As far as defenses go, I would start Seattle. And Houston defense, you could start them. They're kind of a middle of the road in terms of their matchup. They've been decent this year, and they'll get to Russell Wilson a few times. I don't expect them to have a great day, but they won't have a terrible day. Then we look at Dallas and Washington here, another big matchup. Well, as far as quarterbacks go, this is going to be a high-scoring game, a shootout. Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins are both guys you need to start. They have a great matchup. As far as running backs go, Ezekiel Elliott, got to start him. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. The guy's a stud. And I would start Chris Thompson. He's a guy that they get involved a lot in the passing game and the running game, and so he's having a really good year. He's pretty quiet. In terms of a lot of people still don't talk a lot about him, but he's a guy in fantasy terms that have done really well this year. I would sit all other running backs out there until Robert Kelly begins to prove that he's got it back and he's running again with authority. Once again, I won't trust any other backs. As far as wideouts go, you need to start Dez Bryant. Now, he may struggle if Josh Norman comes back. He's missed the last 2 games because of injury. Rumors are he's going to begin to practice. So if Dez Bryant lines up against Josh Norman, you can lower expectations. But it's really hard at this point to sit Dez Bryant. He's done pretty well. He's been fairly productive. Now, as far as the other guys go, this is true of the other Dallas wideouts, and it's true also of the Washington Redskins. And they spread the ball around a lot. Let's look at Washington. Josh Doctson has really come on, former first-round pick. They're getting more and more involved. In fact, last week he started the game, and they sat Pryor. Terrell Pryor is really a wide receiver at this point that I wouldn't even start. I would sit him. Crowder coming this year, a lot of people thought Jamison Crowder was going to have a good year, and they've got him more involved last week, but not that much. And then they have Grant, who stole a few targets here and there and a couple of touchdowns. The problem with it is all 3 of those guys, they really steal a lot of targets from one another, and so that devalues all of them. I wouldn't start any of those guys. And I would say Cole Beasley. If you look at Cole Beasley, he had 1 game where he had 2 TDs. You take that away, his most yards he's had in a game have been 33. So I would sit him and Williams. As far as tight ends go, Witten has had 2 good games in a row. Now faces the Washington defense that is vulnerable to tight ends. You got to start Mark Witten. Reed, you got to start him last week. He came out and did really well. Vernon Davis is a guy that you could start. He really plays second fiddle to Reed. I really want to go with Vernon Davis. I'd only start Vernon Davis if Reed goes down with an injury. As far as kickers go, I would start Bailey Bailey and Hopkins are both going to be on the IR, so you can't start them. The kicker situation is really hazy for this, so I would stay away from any kickers in this game, and I would sit both defenses. As far as Pittsburgh goes and the Lions, I would start Ben Roethlisberger and Matthew Stafford. Now, it's going to be a tough matchup for both of them. Both the Lions and the Steelers are very good against the pass, but with bye weeks and injuries, is there any other quarterbacks out there that you'd be comfortable to roll with? At least these are two veterans. You know they're going to have probably quality days. They're not going to have great games, but they're going to be decent. So once again, I would start them, but there's probably not many other options out there for you. So keep your expectations low. As far as running backs go, start Bell, Le'Veon Bell. He's back into shape. The guy's a stud. You roll with him every week. You can start Amar Abdullah. Now, Pittsburgh does give up their very good defense, but they are vulnerable against the run to some extent. Another running back, there's Riddick. Now, Riddick at times has had PPR value. That is it. He's got some PPR value, but even this year, his PPR value has dipped. And so Theo Riddick is a guy that maybe you could start, but I probably would just stay away from. As far as wideouts go, Antonio Brown, another guy week in and week out. Doesn't matter. Okay, you got to play him. Marvin Jones, what about him at wideout? Sounds like Golden Tate's going to miss the game. Last they said his arm was in a sling, so it sounds like he's going to miss some games with an injury there. Should you go with Marvin Jones? Well, Stafford has to throw to somebody, and so that gives Jones some value. But right now, Pittsburgh is first in the fewest points allowed to wide receivers. I think another thing you need to consider is Marvin Jones had a good game last time he played, but he had 6 catches for 96 yards, but it took 14 targets to do that. He did it against a weak pass defense, and this with Golden Tate missing time with an injury. Before that, his last 19 games, he really struggled. So yeah, right now, Marvin Jones really is technically the number 1 guy there. I probably would play him. He will get volume, he will get targets, but don't expect him to have a great game. I won't be surprised if the guy gets 10, 11 targets and he turns that into 6 catches for maybe 70 yards, which is all right, but not great. Another guy that maybe look at if he comes back is Galladay. As far as Pittsburgh wide receivers goes, Juju Smith-Schuster is on concussion protocol right now, so they don't know if he's going to play. And Bryant, the other wideout, has really at this point is becoming very difficult for the team. Sounds like he's demanded a trade. He's getting less and less playing time. I would not be comfortable rolling with him. I would sit all tight ends. As far as kickers goes, I would sit Prater, but I would start Boswell. And as far as defenses go, I would sit Detroit, but I would start Pittsburgh. Now to our last game, Kansas City versus Denver. Well, I would start Alex Smith. Now this is a guy, I'm going to be honest with you. Early in the year, I thought what he was doing was kind of a fluke. He's been a good quarterback in terms of the NFL, but he's been more of a game manager. But this year, he's putting it all together. This guy's a real deal. I believe he's got 15 touchdown passes to 0 interceptions. Their offense is looking great. And so, yeah, he's a guy that you could definitely start. In fact, he needs to be considered a top 10 quarterback in the meantime. I would sit Trevor Siemian. The guy has been terrible. In fact, another week or two, and it's time for them to look at a quarterback change there. As far as running backs go, you're going to start Hunt, and you're going to start Anderson, sit Jamal Charles at this point. Demaryius Thomas is a guy that you're going to start with. Emmanuel Sanders out. He's going to get targets. They got to throw the ball to somebody, so Demaryius Thomas should rebound and have a good game. And Tyreek Hill is a guy that you need to start. I would sit all other wideouts. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Travis Kelce and the Denver tight ends. I would sit all of them. I would start Harrison Butker. He's been a great kicker since he's come in there. He's done great. I would sit McManus one. He struggled kicking the ball. Trevor Siemian struggling moving the ball. And so in the meantime, I would sit him. I would sit Denver's defense. Even though they're normally quality, they're struggling lately. So sit Denver's defense, and I would start Kansas City's. No, it's a lot of information that we threw out there. I'd love to break it down more, but again, we don't want the video to be too long. What I would say is if you have any questions in terms of who to start, matchup, plays like that, I would love to answer any questions that you have. If you message us on the YouTube video here on the bottom, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have in terms of start, sit, things like that. Once again, thanks for joining us today. God bless and take care.